Hi, this is Sarah, and this is a bit of an overview and exploration of logical levels of therapy. And levels of therapy is a really interesting and widely used technique that is based on the idea that problems don't exist at different levels. It's a bit like Einstein's thoughts. If you want to solve a problem, you've got to find the solution exists on a different level to the problem. You've got to use a different level of thinking. So, within the context of NLP, what is it all about? So it's a very specific language technique based on the NLP logical levels, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. And these are based on the teachings of the fabulous Robert Dilts, who was I guess you'd call him the protege student of Gregory Bateson, who is a mentor for him. And it's all about directional language, and you know a lot about directional language because you understand how, for example, the 4Ws plus how are direction down, and how what's the purpose, what's the intention is direction up, and then we've got lateral chunking, which is what else is that. So it's directional language and directional conversational shift that allows us to explore a different level of the client's thinking with them to allow them to find solutions. So effectively, it allows the client a broader perspective or a different level of perspective. I guess you might also call it a meta perspective, so that they can see the world from outside themselves. And this specific technique obviously shifts either from specific to abstract, or sometimes vice versa, because obviously our brain is not that simple, in the sense that, we don't just operate on one level. We are operating a multi-level relational database all the time. And we understand that actually, from very early on. Abraham Maslow has based his theorem on this idea of the relational database. Although actually, Master Practitioner, I talked to you about how that might be slightly different from the perspective of 2000 onwards. But really, it just allows us to question at different levels to see issues from a very different perspective. And of course, logical levels is nearly always used with phobia release, because it allows the client to get outside of themselves and see the pattern that they're running. Logical levels is often best used with humor, in my personal experience, because sometimes you're dealing with really extreme stuff. Especially if you're dealing with a real phobia. As you know, very few people have real phobia. However, it's a really useful technique if applied with humor to help somebody watch you do their behavior. They get to teach you how to do it, which allows them a very broad meta perspective, and it allows them to see that it's just a pattern. Okay, so what is the theory? Well, Dilts, and if you don't know his name, then please do look him up. He forms a fundamental part of NLP, certainly at the Master Practitioner level, because he is the master of sleight of mouth. And he studied under Gregory Bateson, who he talks so highly of. And I think, honestly, Gregory Bateson is responsible for so much that is used today in the modern world of psychology, in terms of, he had a lot of ideas which I think were before his time, or just not yet applicable, or maybe they weren't. Perhaps they were just unacceptable in his time. However, he really did have a wandering mind and is a very, very interesting guy. He did a lot of work to do with stimulus response. And really, Bateson claimed that most problems and conflicts were actually effectively the result of confusion or misinterpretation of messages. And that's interesting because it's, I guess you might call it a dysfunction in the relational database, or misdirection in the relational database. And he did a lot of work, working from understanding how an animal can be trained in avoidance conditioning, for example, being able to learn different types of avoidance behavior. And he was interested in speed. He was interested in how quickly animals learnt those patterns. And he was really interesting, actually, because he started to look at, you might think of conditioning always to be the Pavlovian approach, where, you ring the bell and the dogs salivate because they've been trained with meat. But he looked at conditioning from all aspects. He looked at it from the perspective of positive conditioning, negative conditioning, speed of conditioning. And he pointed out that this ability to learn patterns or rules of a class, and these different classes of conditioning, well, effectively, the patterns and rules for each class of conditioning were different based on logical type, i.e., the different logical types of learning don't function in the same way that a simple stimulus response model does. And what he suggested was that stimulus response is great if you're trying to learn an isolated behavior. However, the reinforcement for exploration, so a learning to learn in rats, is a very different nature than the testing of a specific object. Let's say, the learning content of exploration. So obviously a low-level behavior, which I guess you would refer to Pavlov for. So, I ring a bell, the dog salivates. This is a very low-level behavior. However, if we're looking to engender excitement, then excitement operates at a very different logical level to salivation. So this is where the idea really came from. And this idea that, to learn discrimination or being creative is really a higher level learning than the specific behavior that actually lead to or make up these specific abilities. And because they're different, and because the levels are different, then effectively the rules change, the dynamics change, and on each different level has effectively different rules. And Bateson was really, really involved in the early development of NLP. And his idea was that effectively, we have to look at solving challenges. I guess rather than call them challenges, let's call them limitations. So solving limitations in thinking at different levels of the actual issue. So if you see here, what we have is environment at the bottom level, behavior, capabilities, beliefs, values, identity, and purpose. And the purpose, I guess, is more of a context or spiritual issue, because it's kind of who else is impacted by this concept or idea. But if you think about it, your identity is such a big concept. Who am I? And what does that mean about me? It's such a high level concept. And it's much, much higher than any beliefs or values that you have or any abilities that you have. I mean, the word capabilities is used here on this slide, but really it's ability. And it's also much higher than any behavior you have. And environment, you might say, okay, well, this is a context reframe. If I do this in the office, is it appropriate? If I do it at home, is it appropriate? And all of these concepts or ideas operate at very specific levels. So, effectively, changing something on an upper level, we might say identity or beliefs or values, really sort of has an impact. It kind of radiates downwards and brings change to the levels below. However, that's quite a simplistic view, and you'll notice that I always talk about, hey, work on values and beliefs first, because actually once you've worked on values and beliefs, then really a lot of the lower level stuff is much easier to shift, or it disappears completely. So to a degree, that's quite a simplistic view, and as you go on to learn more about this, we'll talk about it further. However, effectively, because each successive level is of a different logical type of process, changing something on a lower level doesn't necessarily radiate upwards. And that's really the reason that I'm a firm believer in beliefs and values first, or values first and then beliefs. And identity, which, let's face it, relates to our emotions, our feelings, who we really are, our very being. So, what does it mean? How do we work with this? So, we use questions like where when we're looking to question environment. We use the what question to question behavior. Ability is always a how. We use a why or what purpose to understand beliefs and values. And we might ask a who question to really understand identity. When it comes to purpose, well, yeah, the higher level purpose of everything. I talk about this a great deal. For me, this is the pure concept of trust. Some people call it faith. Faith for me always links a little bit to religion, so I resist it. However, it's faith in yourself, and this is really, in my mind, what purpose is all about. Okay, so just to be clear, this is based on Bateson, and Robert Dilts sort of took it and ran with it, and he added 2 levels. So let me just explain that. So basically, Bateson looked at kind of environment to behavior, the shifts in between, if you like. He looked at that as 0, and then he looked at the next level as 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you want to look at it, I guess the most simplistic way that I look at it is, 0 is effectively no change. And as the numbers get higher, then we get closer to a greater impact of change. For example, if you're clear about the level of faith you have in yourself, the trust you have in yourself, your impact in the world, and you know who you are, then actually any change made at that level is really going to impact the lower levels. So that's the way I like to look at it, because for me it's quite an easy to grasp concept. So, just to be clear, environmental factors look at external opportunities or limits or constraints a person has to react to. So, where do you have to go to work? When do you have to go to work? So generally they tend to talk about time and space or place. Behavior is made up of actions or reactions taken within that specific environment. And you can ask a question about behavior, what specifically is it about his or her behavior that creates X, i.e. creates that reaction in you? So that's a what question. Abilities or capabilities is the how question, and that's because they guide and direct our behaviors. If we are really creative, then we're going to behave in a very different way to somebody who perhaps is lower on the creativity front and is more process driven. So really, the how are you choosing to do that question always helps people to solve limitation or expand limitation within the ability or capability level. Now, beliefs and values, obviously this is our why, or our sort of lower level purpose, and our beliefs and values really determine what we are capable of. I believe I can, I believe I can't. I'm not good enough. Determines our ability to achieve X, for example. So, as you know, I'm a little bit resistant to the word or the question why, unless it's used with a very specific question. So I'd rather replace it with, well, what is the purpose of believing that? What is it you get from believing that? What are you going to have to stop doing if you choose to release that now? So identity really is, your overall purpose or mission. And obviously, who you think you are defines your values or belief. If I put it in a real category, which, as you know, I detest, let's say we're talking about somebody who calls themselves, I don't know, an environmentalist. So I'm passionate about the environment, and I am the kind of person who puts environment first. Okay? Now, obviously, the concept of me as a person who puts the environment first is naturally going to flow down and impact my beliefs and values. And obviously, the spirituality, purpose, faith in yourself, trust, which is really what I put at the top of the tree. This is all about how we have operated within family, within community, within global systems, and it goes from inside, internal to external. So, can I trust myself to do X? If I choose to do X, how does that impact the rest of the world? Okay? So, if we look at it again in slightly different layers, think of it very simply. So environment, where am I? What am I doing that is creating a limitation or a problem? What do I know how to do? What can I do? The big word can. Capabilities, as we know, is all modal operators of possibility and necessity. What is important to me about what I believe and what I expect? As you know, whatever you believe becomes an expectation. Identity is who am I really, and what does it mean to be that person? And when there's real trust, we start to ask some pretty big questions. And I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound a little bit like values level 2 tribal, and yet it's way beyond that, and it's different to that as well, because actually what you're saying is, well, I know who I am, and I'm 100% clear on who or what that is, so now I want to find people to run with. It's not about I need people, it's about I want to find my people. I want to find more people who inspire me, who allow me to feel alive when I'm with them, who I really enjoy. What is my purpose? And that's what it's all about. Okay, so we're going to talk about it in terms of the Phobia Model, because the Phobia Model is probably the main time that you use it, certainly at practitioner level. And we've been through the fact that this is directional language. We're taking them from the very, very specific reaction. So really this is in the behavioral level. And we're taking it up, so that the client can see the pattern or the behavior from a broader perspective. Okay? So, what does it look like when we're using it in the Phobia Model? It looks like this. So let's say we have got, I don't know, fear of spiders. Okay, so how is being scared of spiders a problem for you? Well, every time I think I see a spider in the room, I can't sleep. Okay, and how is that a problem? Well, actually, I live somewhere where I know there are a lot of spiders, so often I feel like an insomniac. Okay, so actually what you're saying is that spiders stop you sleeping. Well, no, it's not really the spiders that stop me sleeping. It's the idea of the spiders. Oh, so this is just inside your head. Well, no, because sometimes I do actually see a spider, and that's definitely external. Oh, okay. So, okay, well, that's fine. Let's just look at what you really do then when you see a spider, or let's face it, most of the time when you think you see a spider. So what actually happens? What specifically do you do? What exactly is your behavior? Okay, so now we're looking at the meta model, okay? So we're really chunking down. We're finding out what the specific behavior is. And actually, phobia is very similar to strategy, or being very scared of something is also very similar to strategy. You're looking for trigger points, and then you're looking to break that behavior down into very, very small chunks. Okay, so once you start to get into it, and actually, to be clear, when you're using it in Phobia Model, you might use up to 15 to 20 minutes doing logical levels of therapy. A, because it can be a lot of fun. B, because you can really make the client laugh. And C, because that loosening of their model of the world is really, really powerful. So that actually, when you choose to either do a compulsion blowout strategy, or if you choose to change it with submodalities, or if you choose to do the fast phobia model afterwards, it's much, much easier to release, because funnily enough, the client's already released the problem using logical levels. And what the actual, I guess, formal technique does is it allows the client to know that a technique has been done to support them in that release. Okay, so here we are. We've got somebody who claims that now they're an insomniac because of spiders. And obviously we could ask lots of different questions about that. Is it only spiders that create the insomnia? What would happen if a gecko were in your room? Would it still be difficult for you to sleep? So we're starting to really play around with that presenting problem. We're starting to look at the cause and effect. We're starting to look at Cartesian coordinates. What would happen if A did not lead to B? Or what would happen if C led to B? Or does C not lead to B? Okay, so you start playing around. And is it all insects? I mean, what about mosquitoes? A really big mosquito could probably look like a spider. So actually, do mosquitoes stop you sleeping? Okay, so is it the bite of the mosquito that stops you sleeping? So you really just start to play around with it. Ask a ton of questions, a ton of unnecessary questions. You might think they're unnecessary because you may well see the pattern, obviously. It's just that you want the client to see the pattern, and you want a little bit of frustration. You want this entropy point, this pain point that allows the client to go, I'm so done with this problem that I just want to move on now. And actually that sensation of done with the problem, I'm so over it, is probably enough to release it a lot of the time. Okay, so we do a lot of Cartesian quadrats that are around the presenting problem. What are you going to have to stop doing? What is it that you like doing that you get to do? Who normally manages the spider? Is there somebody involved in this problem? Do you sleep with a partner? Do you force them to get out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning? Do you wake them up when you're not asleep? Do you change your behavior? Is it the same if you're alone? Is it the same if your children are in the house? Do you try and be brave if your child is present? What happens? And does it only happen at night? Does it happen during the day? Notice I'm asking all of these levels of question. Let me just skip back again to this triangle. So, where does it happen? Is it only in bed? You mentioned insomnia. Insomnia seems to be a big thing here. Is this about the insomnia, or is this about your reaction to the spider? Does it only happen in the bedroom? What happens if you see a spider in the kitchen? What happens if you see a spider outside? What is it about the spider being present that creates this reaction? This is my what question, my behavior level. And how could you manage it? What stops you managing it that way? What stops you ignoring the spider? What would happen if you could ignore the spider? How do you think the spider would feel? Do you have some kind of connection to spiders? Have you always felt this way about spiders? How have you dealt with it in the past? How do you want to deal with it in the future? Oh, what do you believe about spiders? Do you think they are out to get you? Do you think there's a big spider conspiracy out there? Do you think that maybe spiders would also like to avoid you, or do you think that actually they'll run across you at any given point? What is it you believe about spiders? And do you think spiders are important in the world? I mean, do you know much about them? Have you made friends with any of your spiders and understood their purpose in life? And at this point, obviously, it's starting to get a little bit silly, and you want more and more and more of this, okay? And this is all part of looking at this from the spider's perspective, from the client's perspective, from the outsider's perspective, and just giving as many different viewpoints as possible. Okay, so who am I really? So who else is involved in this conspiracy of spiders? And who do you involve? And who are you to be scared of spiders? What does that mean about you? What would it mean about you if you weren't scared of spiders? All of these questions help to break down the model of the world. So I have no desire to get too prescriptive about how you're going to work with this, because I am sure that you will have your own style and you have more than enough creativity to make your clients laugh and to manage this in the most appropriate way. So all I really want to say here is, when you get to the playtime part, you really want to break it down, and I recommend mishearing what they say and really engendering some giggles. Get your giggle on by acting out what they do. So everything that they describe to you, I want you to sort of go, oh, is it like this? And then really exaggerate it. And this works from the playtime. How do you do it? When do you do it? What do you do? What specifically do you do? What else do you do? What's not happening? Into the teach me to do it. And as they see you deliver a very over-exaggerated and slightly incorrect strategy, if they are also laughing, this actually blows it all the way out for them. So you can loop it. You can do it over and over again in different ways. Just be silly, be ridiculous, and exaggerate. It's really, really important. Now, at this point, when you've done your prep work, you may choose to do a compulsion blowout where you turn up all the submodalities and literally blow up the experience, or you might choose to do the phobia or fast phobia model from Timeline Therapy. Whatever is your choice is absolutely fine. And this is how we use logical levels with phobia. Now, I just want to talk about this a little bit more generally for general therapy use, okay? And I want you to think back to these levels again. So think about how it sort of goes from environment all the way up to the top, whether it's belief or value, or even identity. So let's just say, I don't know, let's say you walk into a house, or let's say your client's walked into a house and they've said, oh, you know, this person's got so many sharp objects in their house, it's a really dangerous place and I just can't take my child there. And the next thing you say, okay, well, how is that a problem? And what they might do when you ask them how is that a problem is they might actually skip up a level, and they might say, well, you know, when I went round to my friend's house, actually, not only did I notice all these sharp edges and all this dangerous stuff about for children, what I realised is that my friend had absolutely no awareness of the fact that it was dangerous for my child, and they just sort of continued as normal, and frankly, that really, really bothered me. Okay, so what really bothered you about it? Well, quite clearly it's dangerous, quite clearly it's not a safe place for a child. Beliefs, values, all mixed up in here. And, you know, it makes me question them. It makes me question them as a person. You notice we're going up in levels. And it makes me think, do they value me? Do they care and respect about the people that I love? And do they even have an awareness of anything outside of themselves? Actually, I've come to the conclusion that maybe they're a bit of a dangerous person. So I don't know if you've noticed, but we've gone from something dangerous in the environment to dangerous person, which is all the way up to identity. And it can skip through the levels. It could skip from, oh, they've got dangerous stuff in their house, that means they're a dangerous person. It could skip all of those levels between environment and identity. I mean, it's rare. Be aware that people who are liable to chunk up very, very quickly, and often this is an avoidance technique, and I don't mean a conscious one, it's actually resistance, because they don't really want to look at the reality of the situation. It's safer for them to believe that that person is a dangerous person. So the driver safety behind the whole concept is so big in the forefront of their mind that it's very easy for them to just go, that's not safe, they must be a dangerous person. So just think about how things skip up and down levels, and open your ears and listen to the levels that the problems are in. And that way, it gives you the opportunity to ask a relevant question within a certain level, or to skip up and ask a higher level question. So, for example, the object in that person's house is dangerous. Well, how do you know? And that being the case, what do you believe about that? And what does that mean about them? So you can test it all the way up and down the scale. And this is how we use logical levels of therapy. And logical levels, is such a huge foundation. Can you say huge foundation? It's a fundamental part of sleight of mouse techniques and understanding sleight of mouse and how you create conversational change without any therapeutic technique. So it's the foundation of conversational change. It's really, really good to get your head around. And remember that one of the key elements is clowning around. So have your fun, practice with it. Spending time with kids is a really good way of learning how to do logical levels. They skip around all the time because they're learning sequence, and often they're out of sequence, and it's a great way to practice your questioning skills. So I hope that was a really helpful approach to A, how to use it for the Phobia model, and B, how to use it or start to learn to use it as the foundation of conversational change. Any questions, give me a shout. You know where I am, and I look forward to seeing you soon.